Hello everyone, Revan619 here, how the devil are you? In today's video I wanted to discuss the sorry state of operatives. Now, operatives gets ragged on a lot by players that play on the higher difficulties, which can be confusing to people that either aren't familiar with the game or only play on lower difficulties. The way that talents work in the game is they can greatly increase your damage, and depending on the kit that they have, they can be very front-loaded, such as like a Blade Dancer, which is incredibly powerful off the back, or they can be quite back-loaded, which is, say, Warrior, that requires a lot more talents and items to be quite powerful. Operative is in the sorry state of affairs that it uses multiple stats to do what it wants to with its game plan. So it needs to invest into intelligence, perception, its skill to hit, and it doesn't have access to any of the defensive stats in either agility or toughness, which can make survival very difficult for them. And then there's the whole gimmick in general. It's just not very good. So before I just go on telling you it's terrible, let's actually look into it and sort of explain why it's not exactly the best, and why people can think that the initial high damage they see in Act 1 with, say, high base damage weapons like Sniper seems good, but drops off very quickly. So the main gimmick of Operative works around Analyze Enemies, which is at the start of the Operative's turn, they inflict one stack of the exploit effect on all enemies in their line of sight. If the Operative hits a target with an exploit stat, that attack deals 5 times perception bonus % more damage, and this damage is increased by 10% for each additional exploit. So if you have 9 exploits on them, you're going to do an extra 90% damage, which isn't actually that bad. The main issue here is whenever an Operative attacks, it removes all exploits, and the only defensive talent that it really has access to requires there to be an exploit on there to be in effect. There's also the issue that on extra turns, such as Bring It Down, Finest Hour and whatnot, the Operative Analyze Enemies doesn't apply, and you have to manually put them on there. And like I said, when it comes to your level ups, you have access to Intelligence, Perception, Ballistic Score and Weapon Skill, but you don't have access to agility or toughness, which is something you kind of want. Yes, you can use upgrades to do this, such as the characteristic trainings, but it's going to make it hard for you to invest in it, because if you want to do any kind of real damage, you need to be going into intelligence and perception. But there's also sometimes where you use them can seem quite random, and while some of the effects can seem strong at first, the limitation on them can be quite difficult. There's also the fact that the main upgrade, dismantling attack, just isn't very good. So what this does is the Operative immediately inflicts one exploit on all enemies in combat, then makes a free attack against the target. That attack always hits until the end of combat. The target suffers minus 30% dodge and minus 30% armor. Now, that's quite good, but most other upgrades and the heroic actions, the other classes, they're battle defining. So a Blade Dancer can wipe the battlefield from it, a Warrior can wipe the battlefield from it, a Soldier can wipe the battlefield from it, a Officer gives an extra turn with unlimited attacks. So they're quite a bit stronger, and the upgrades for them aren't exactly all that good. So the Operatives, the target cannot move, which that's one enemy. There's no really tough enemies that you need to pin down like that. You can lower their weapon skill and ballistic skill, but if they were dead, you wouldn't need that anyway. Dismantling attack also intimidates all enemies in a 5-cell radius around the target, reducing their armor and dodge by 15%. That's not very far. Most enemies are quite spread out, and if they're grouped up, you're probably going to be able to kill them with an area attack anyway. The target also provokes tactical opportunities whenever it attacks. That can be useful against certain bosses that have interrupt actions, but overall it's not that good. So I'm actually going to bring up the spreadsheet here, and we're going to look at some of the talents so we can sort of discuss them and see what I mean. So when we look at what the actual talents do for Operative, bear in mind that we know that when they have exploits, we're getting that one-time bonus. Fresh Target is a fairly good one. Whenever the Operative attacks an enemy that is at full wounds, that attack deals 10 plus perception % bonus more damage to that enemy. So that's quite a good opener there. Instant Exposure makes Exposed Weakness cost 0 AP. Exposed Weakness is the armor strip ability based on the number of exploits in there, which is actually something very useful, but unfortunately a single target. Then you have Tide of Excellence. This is is something that could be OP, but it isn't. So Tide of Excellence, whenever the operative triggers an exploit on the enemy, the operative gains 1 damage and 2% armor penetration to the end of combat, and that stacks. However, it doesn't matter how many stacks you provoke. If you do an area attack and hit 5 enemies, you get that once. You hit one enemy that has 10 stacks, you get that once. So it doesn't build up that quick. You actually need a high number of attacks to make this useful. However, Operative doesn't get extra attacks. It's limited to the 1 attack action. Yes, you can increase that with dual weapon fighting or Grenadier, but it's not really effective. It's very slow to build up. Weak Body, Weak Soul is one of the better upgrades. It's one that I like to use. So Exposed Weakness also reduces the enemy's toughness and willpower by 3 times intelligence bonus for 1 round. So that one's actually pretty decent. You then have Ballistics Calculation, which is if the operative attacks target afflicted by an exploit from a distance of 15 minus perception bonus cells or farther, that attack deals 15% extra damage. So that one can be quite nice, but you need to be really far back for that. And enemies will also be constantly charging at you. And because you go low on the initiative, you might start in a good position, but they could be within that zone before you even get your turn. Combat Insight. If the operative's perception bonus is 10 or higher, they get plus 1 AP and ignore enemies' deflection. That you only get this when you get buffs. So if you've been buffed up, that's actually not that bad. Comprehensive Analysis. If the target's analyzed enemies has 2 or more exploits, that target suffers 1 additional exploit. So you can increase your number of exploits by using the ability, and that's tied to your intelligence bonus. This could be buffed. It's not bad. I do take it as it is. Continuous Analysis. At the start of the operative's turn, the enemy with the largest number of exploits also receives an additional stack. Again, it's just another +1. It's not the best, but you need every little bit you can to try and squeeze out damage. Covert Protocol. Whilst the operative is in half cover, the cover efficiency is increased by 15%. This bonus is doubled if the operative has not moved during their turn. Cover's not exactly the best thing, especially when everything's charging you in melee. Improved Tactics is an upgrade to one of their abilities, which it only requires 3 exploits instead of 4 to get the damage increased, and you also increase it by int bonus. So that's actually a nice upgrade there. It used to do a lot more. They nerfed the ability. We'll look at the ability in a little bit. Informed Hit. If the operative uses precise attack on a target affected by 10 minus in-score bonus or more exploits and scores a hit, that hit becomes a critical hit. Would be useful if by midpoint in the game you don't always critical, but it can help you get there. Insightful Precision. Precise attack gains the operative's bonus perception equal to the number of exploit removed. If you could build exploits quicker, this would make your perception score really high, but again, it's just a very slow way to build it. So Joint Offensive. If the operative's allies gain operative's int bonus divided by 2 hit chance and critical hit chance whilst attacking targets affected by exploits. This is one of their best passes because you just don't want to be attacking and you want to be building up exploits, and it increases your allies' chance to hit and score criticals. Then you have Offensive Pattern Prediction. So this got nerfed. I'm not too mad about the nerf, but it's not very useful the way it currently works. So the operative suffers 5 plus int% bonus less damage from enemies affected by exploits. This would be good if the fact that your attacks didn't remove all exploits. If they were left with, say, just 1 at the end, or they had an ability that when they remove exploits, they would then place an exploit, this would be a little bit more useful. Passive Learning. On the first hand of combat, the operative randomly distributes the same number of exploits as when using analyzed enemies amongst all enemies within the 10 cell radius around the operative. This is quite useful, especially for the first turn, to actually get that initial set up. Reactive Study. If an enemy affected by an exploit within 5 cells from the operative attacks the operative or an ally, that enemy suffers 1 additional exploit. However, you need them to have an exploit for this to work. If it just always works, that would be a big upgrade. So then Sharpshooters. This one, it seems really good, but it's also very limited. If the operative has not moved this turn, they gain perception bonus ballistic skill and intelligence bonus divided by 2 damage for every 5 cells between them and the target. You need 5 cells. So to get this twice, you need 10 cells. There is a lot of distance you need for this to be useful, and like I said, because you're going last, you're rapidly losing damage. And even if you give them bonus turns from a Grand Strategist, again, you're not applying your exploits. So this does incline people that when they make their operatives, they tend to go grand strategists through their zones, but then they're losing a lot of potential damage they could be getting from assassin or bounty hunter, but they're trying to get around the fact that they have no defensive talents and they need to go first. Sniper expertise is a upgrade to perfect spot. Additionally, grants the operative 5+ perception, bonus % arm penetration against enemies that are 7 cells away or further. So again, you need things to be quite far away. Terrifying presence. If intimidation kills target, the damage of all other enemies in the area intimidation is reduced by an additional 4x intelligence bonus. Intimidation is not very good, so you're not really going to use it. And then Uncanny Sight is one of the best upgrades here, which is the operative inflicts an exploit even on enemies which are outside of the operative's line of sight. This is going to be something you do want to prioritize. But now let's have a little look at the abilities as well. So when it actually comes to the abilities here, we have joint analysis. So let me just get myself out of the way here. We'll pop me over here. So until the operative's next turn, their allies' attacks also remove exploits and deal intelligence bonus % more damage. But they don't get bonuses from a higher number of them, so it does help that it gets your intelligence bonus allies attacks, but it's still fairly low impact. So precise attack. For the next attack against a target affected by an exploit, that target's cover efficiency will be reduced by the perception bonus stacks exploits. This attack will also have additional hit chance. Very useful for Pascal early on because his to hit just seems terrible and will often miss for seemingly no reason. Even if you have higher ballistic score, you have to heavily invest into perception with him to actually land attacks and use this with your plasma cannon. Intimidation. The operative's next non-area attack inflicts an intimidation effect on the first target hit by the attack and all enemies in a 5-cell radius around that target. The damage dealt by intimidated enemies is reduced by 9% until the operative's next turn. This negative effect is doubled for enemies with less than 24% armor. So this is based on the intelligence here. It's not very useful. You tend to not use that one. Perfect spot. Whilst in cover, the operative gains 25% cover efficiency, 15 perception, and 15 ballistic skill. This effect lasts till the operative moves, does not stack. This is just useful to get those bonuses in so you can actually do a little bit more, and it will also get your perception up so you can use some of the previous talents. Now, tactical knowledge. This got nerfed. So let's read through this. So Operative removes 1 exploit from each enemy within a 5-cell radius around the point within 10 cells away from the Operative. If there is only 1 enemy in the area, the Operative removes all exploit stacks from that enemy. All allies gain exploits removed armor until the end of combat, which is pretty good. If 4 more exploits are removed, 3 with the upgrade, the Operative gains 2 times exploit removed percentage damage until the end of combat. So it's not actually that big a boost, but it can be quite useful. And unfortunately, when you reuse this, it doesn't stack and it resets the number. Whilst the armor effect stacks, the actual remove effect doesn't. So operatives don't have that many talents that boost their damage. They don't have any specialized stuff. It's going to be mostly single target weapons. And they don't really have very good defenses. And when it comes to looking at the itemization and the options that they have for weapons, it can also be quite limited. Now, Pascal is uniquely boosts the power of plasma based on his tech priest. So outside of Pascal, plasma rifles aren't that good, but they are quite good with him. The main issue when it comes to snipers is they can be quite high damage and they can have fairly good armor pen, but they're still single shot. But you would expect someone that can only target 1 enemy to do a lot more damage than someone that has a burst fire to target multiple enemies. However, it doesn't even compare. The most you're going to see an operative do, even in the final boss encounter, with all buffs up, is probably about 4k in a shot. Previously, before they nerfed it, you were seeing assassin operative do like 20k, but those days are long gone. However, Argenta can do 15k bursts in current patch. And then some of the other options that, say, early on, you might use the stub carbine and then upgrade to a sniper, and then you use a plasma on Pascal. But if you're looking at, say, a melter, melters have pretty much no talents from the other classes. It's unique to Pascal. However, the actual damage that melters do is far lower than what you can do with, say, his plasma gun, like the ancient plasma rifle. I was building up to about 2k shots on his ancient plasma rifle on a finest hour turn, just constantly rapid firing. However, melter gun was barely getting up to 700, and non-Pascal operatives wouldn't be able to even begin to do that. They're going to be looking to go more of the excited long last or the gloom rifle. they're not going to get that many benefits. And even worse is currently arc rifles. So arc rifles cost 2 AP to fire. It counts as a single shot attack, and it can look very devastating in lower difficulties. However, the effect to when you hit targets and arc the actual damage is bugged. It only seems to work on the Alpha arc rifle and one other, which is the Oath one. However, on the Alpha's arc rifle, it does actually work, and it goes out to 4 cells. So this one can be quite useful, but it's still a 2 AP cost. I would like to see them have a slight range increase, because obviously 8 cells is not very much. The damage doesn't spread out very well, and again, it's not the best for boosting these single shots. And same with plasma rifles. Their overcharge and their area stuff, it's not really that game-changing. Plasma rifles need a buff, arc rifles need a buff, snipers are okay, but operatives themselves, if they had a buff, could make them better. But it just, operatives are left in quite a weird spot. They're definitely the weakest archetype in the game, and depending on where you go with them, depends what you can do with them. So assassins will do more damage to enemies that are already missing health, which it can build up, but they're still fairly low attack economy. They don't have the best movement when they come from an operative. And again, they don't trigger openings on extra turns like operatives. Bounty hunters can create a lot more armor pen, and they can give out some decent buffs. And stuff like Instead of the Prey is pretty useful. So their piercing shots can be quite good for over penetration. So you can hit multiple enemies with those single shots, which can be quite useful. Claim the Bounty will increase your attack economy. Cold the Bold will do extra damage based on your ballistic score. So Bounty Hunter is normally the one I go for, because obviously extra turns upon trail are good. Giving buffs of additional damage to allies with raid, not too bad, not an early priority. Ensnare the Prey is very useful in Act 3. But overall, comparing Operative to any of the other base archetypes, it's not the same. Blade Dancer, we can't always compare to Blade Dancer, because Blade Dancer is crazy OP. But they don't compete with soldiers, they don't compete with warriors. Officers are way more impactful. Bounty hunters, not bounty hunters, but operatives are a partial damage, partial support archetype, and it's not very impactful in either of them. So I think the devs could actually be doing some work and looking at them. Like I said, when I'm looking at the talents, the ones that I would look at to increase a little bit, if Reactive Study just gave exploits just as is, that would make that a lot more useful to increase the usability of offensive pattern prediction so you can actually survive. Maybe decreasing the distance on sniper expertise from, instead of 7 cells away or further, to maybe 5. And for sharpshooter, dropping it from 5 cells to 3 cells. So every 3 cells, you're getting these buffs. And it would increase your damage quite a bit. Like I said, you want this to be the high damage single target, but it just doesn't work very well. And even worse, Death Dealer, the Exemplar talent to get extra attacks after you kill, and Expert Finesse on Bounty Hunter don't seem to be working correctly. Sometimes Expert Finesse can just go off and you start blasting your own teammates, so they need to be buffed in themselves. I think lowering the requirements of Bounty Hunter's prey targets from like tier 4 to tier 2 or even tier 3 would buff a lot of that stuff, but looking at Bounty Hunters is an entirely different video. But yeah, Operative just isn't in a good spot. Let me know below how you think you would buff them, or if you think it's already good as is, let me know why you think it, because when it comes to the actual Operative companions you have, Idra is a unique case because she's just a psycho, so she's just naturally very good as is. Yiralit is pre-built to be a sniper, so basically what she has here is very similar to how I would actually build it. And like I said, you can go into either Bounty Hunter or Assassin with her, but the damage you're doing is never going to be quite impressive, though Yiralit has won some encounters being far back. But like I said, there are some small upgrades to increase her single target damage that would make her a lot more usable. And Pascal, uniquely powerful with Plasma, but like Plasma overall, I think his talent should be something that's more tied to Forge World and his Tech Priest, or give ways for players to get their hands on some of those Plasma stuff, because it makes them a little bit more useful. But for me, yeah, I go more the buff route when it comes to it, because early game, that's where you're going to want to do that, and then Bounty Hunter can pick up some stuff. But they do need those damage increases, so their single target is a little bit more impressive. But like I said, let me know what you think, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.